Hello, I'm Osvaldo Sala, President of the Ecological Society of America. Welcome to the opening plenary for the very first Ecological Society of America virtual meeting. Thank you for attending the meeting, and I hope you are enjoying all of the live, on-demand, and networking sessions. It is my honor to introduce our speaker, Joppa, who is the Chief Environmental Officer at Microsoft, where he leads the company's sustainability efforts. With a PhD in ecology from Duke University and numerous publications in leading academic journals, Dr. Joppa is a uniquely accredited voice for sustainability in the tech industry. In 2017, he founded Microsoft's AI for Earth program, a 5-year, $50 million commitment to leveraging machine learning to help transform the way society manages Earth natural resources. Dr. Joppa's talk is entitled Scaling Ecological Insights. I look forward to hearing his perspective about how ecology and big data contribute to finding answers to pressing sustainability issues around the world. Dr. Joppa will discuss how scaling ecological insight is possible by harnessing rapid advances in data collection and storage, the availability of massive computing infrastructure, deep algorithmic advances, and global access to local information and predictions. Join us for a live Q&A directly following this talk on Zoom at noon Eastern Daylight Time. Now, it's our pleasure to hear Dr. Joppa's plenary talk.
Welcome to this year's all-virtual Ecological Society of America meeting. My name is Joppa. I'm the Chief Environmental Officer at Microsoft, and I just wanted to start off by saying what an honor and a privilege it is for me to be invited to deliver the opening plenary address for this year's ESA meeting. I've always only ever wanted to be a scientist, and an environmental scientist, and an ecologist in particular. And I very early in my career found my home in the Ecological Society of America. I'm fortunate enough to call so many folks in the society friends and colleagues and mentors and collaborators. And so for me to be here giving this plenary is, as I said, just an incredible honor and a privilege. I also wanted to just say how sorry I am that I'm not there in person, that we all aren't there in person to spend time together and to learn from each other, especially in the hallway chats, the after conference dinners and gatherings where I know so many, not only friendships are made, but also incredibly insightful new scientific collaborations are put together. And so while that is disappointing, I also wanted to commend the ESA conference leadership for really putting together, I think, a virtual conference that has the potential to bring together people in entirely new ways, a way to build a more inclusive conference, and potentially a conference that has the potential to scale across the planet, to new communities, to new people, and potentially to future new Ecological Society of America members. And it's really that concept of scale, albeit in a different way, that I wanted to focus on in my talk today, which I've called Scaling Ecological Insights. And there's a few reasons that I wanted to talk about scale, and particularly how we scale insights into ecological systems. And the first reason really is because of something that we all know way too much about, which is simply that this conference is taking place at a time when we are all facing problems of a truly planetary scale. So in my current role at Microsoft, I really focus on environmental systems through the 4 key areas of climate, water, waste, and biodiversity in the ecosystems that they comprise. And so everybody has their favorite statistics here. These are some of the ones that really motivate me to the scope and the scale of the challenge that we have ahead of us. 420 gigatons of carbon, that's the outstanding carbon budget that we have left if we're going to stay under a 1.5 degree climate increase future. And the reason that that's so important is because if we are going to do that, then we will be able to avert the worst socio and economic and environmental implications of a rapidly changing climate. Overshoot that 420 gigaton budget, and we don't really know or fully understand the way that our climate and the rest of our biological and physical systems will react. The problem is we're spending about 42 of those 420 gigatons every year, which means that we have very little time to act and a very long way to go if we're to make meaningful progress. 55% is what the UN is estimating the gap between water supply or availability and water demand over the coming decades if we don't do something in that space. 1.6 gigatons, that number just sticks in my head as the total amount of food waste, just food waste alone, that is wasted every year. Food that we grow purposefully to better the human condition and we allow to go to waste. 25% are the number of, is the percentage of species that we estimate to be threatened with extinction across the planet. And so there's incredible array and diversity of numbers like this, but they all just say one thing, that we have problems at a planetary scale. And we also have expectations to solve these problems. And those expectations are at a societal scale. You just have to read the news every day to understand what a hot topic the status of our environment actually is, and the actions or the inactions that any particular governments and societies are making. And I know this is the Ecological Society of America, a society I know well, so this may be the most controversial thing that I'm going to say all day, but I've had the opportunity to have a long lineage of British academic mentors. And so what I was taught really was that, you know, you're doing good science if your work is published in Nature, and you know your science matters if your work is covered in The Economist. So that's a very UK-centric view of the world, of course, and we could change that to our favorite ESA journal and our favorite US economic publication. But I think what we've seen over time is that the linkage between those two publication outlets, those two journals, if you will, are coming together more and more. There isn't a issue of Nature or any environmental journal that comes out, or scientific journal that comes out, that doesn't cover the environmental catastrophes that are unfolding around the world. And there really isn't an issue of The Economist that's published that doesn't strongly cover these issues as well. And of course, there's a wide variety of publications in between, everything from Wired to Time, showcasing just how high of a level of societal expectation there is for leaders, including all of us, to do the work necessary to get out ahead of this challenge. But if we take a step back, for me, this issue of scale is one that I've really focused on from very early on in my career. It was about 10 years after the publication of two papers, one paper, one book, that were really transformative for me and my thinking and me and my career. And the first one, of course, that I stumbled upon, well, I shouldn't say I stumbled upon it, it was put in front of me during my undergraduate studies, this now classic paper by Simon Levin in 1992 on the problem of pattern and scale in ecology, where what Levin was doing was arguing that this issue of scale, it is for sure a fundamental conceptual problem in ecology and potentially in all of science, because we are facing these issues of fields like evolutionary ecology and evolutionary science, divorced from fields like ecosystem ecology and ecosystem science. But that divorce between those two things is extremely problematic because it means that our findings and the science that we're doing doesn't necessarily scale. And it was this second publication that really fundamentally changed my entire outlook on science and my entire outlook on my career, and in fact changed my career itself, which was Stuart Pimm's 1992 book, The Balance of Nature. And I remember reading the introduction to this book, and there was a very simple almost hand-drawn illustration to go along with this quote here, which is, in order to manage, we must understand how populations and communities will change over the very organizational, temporal, and spatial scales about which we know least. And there's a few bits to this quote that are so important to me. The first is to manage. In application of our scientific understanding to improve environmental systems, and this about which we know least. Because, you know, as a young university student, I was often shocked on a daily basis to find out that I didn't actually know everything. And it was even more shocking for me to find out that maybe science didn't actually know everything either, and that there was some significant problems. And there's this drawing in The Balance of Nature that shows the organizational, temporal, and spatial scales at which biodiversity exists, and this massive missing dimension of our scientific understanding across all of those areas. And so ultimately, when I got done reading that book, what I came to understand as an early career ecologist is the simple fact that we really know a lot about a little, and we really know very little about a lot. I think, you know, we know a lot about specific ecological communities and specific ecological interactions and specific ecological productivity functions for specific research plots. For instance, we know a lot about some specific taxonomies. For instance, we know a lot about birds, but the vast majority of life on Earth is not yet scientifically classified, not yet scientifically discovered. In fact, the vast majority of Earth's surface, if you think about the submarine realms, has never even been explored by humankind. And so that's really what I decided to spend my career thinking about, these basic ecological questions of what is where, how much is there, and how fast is it changing. Those questions across spatial and temporal scales and across ecological taxonomies, so that we could get a better understanding of what our world is, what our Earth is made up of, and the implications that it might have for our human species. And more importantly, from a societal perspective, to be thinking about questions like what could be there, or very societal questions of what should be there. What should be there in order for us to solve some of our biggest, most outstanding challenges, our challenges of mitigating and adapting to rapidly changing climates, ensuring resilient food supplies, providing clean water to human populations rapidly growing to 10 billion, all while stemming this ongoing and catastrophic loss of biodiversity around the world. And what that means, the way I think about that what is where, how much is there, and how fast is it changing, transforming into what could be there, what should be there. That's the information that we will need if we are ever going to solve for what I think of as this really existential equation, this existential optimization, which is how do we minimize our environmental footprint, our human environmental footprint, while maximizing our overall human global experience. That's what I have spent my career thinking about. I know that's what so many members of the ESA have done as well. And at the core of it all sits the scale, sits solving these problems at the planetary scale they exist at, solving our problems at the societal scale we need to solve them at. And as I was going through my scientific studies and my more academic aspects of my career, I was asking a lot of those questions. I was thinking about scale. How does the structure of ecological communities scale? How do our conservation interventions like protected areas and the effectiveness of them scale? But there was a few things that I started thinking about as part of asking those questions. And the first was a very practical question. If you're going to ask those questions and answer them effectively, do your methods scale? Are you doing your science in a way? Are you not just studying scale and doing your science at scale, but are the methods by which you are performing your science, are those scalable methods? And once I started thinking down that line, I started asking myself, some bigger questions, which is, well, if that's all true, then what are the scalable processes and the scalable programs and the scalable platforms upon which we can extend our scientific understanding so that we can start to actually solve these problems instead of just suggest solutions to them in the pages of academic journals? And that's something that really captured my attention in the early stages of my career. And I started thinking about ways that I could be additional to the system, ways that I could go out and try to capture scale, ways that I could not just study it, but achieve it and work to apply it in the pursuit of solving environmental challenges. And that's when I started really starting to look around and saying, well, what else scales? Right? What are the things that are proven in human history and our current human experience to have scaled? And you can't ask that question for very long without immediately turning your eye towards technology, and particularly the technology that has served as the foundation of the technology sector. And particularly the technology of integrated circuits. And Gordon Moore's 1965 forecast, where he predicted that the complexity for minimum component costs is increased, or showed that the complexity for minimum component costs is increased at a rate of roughly a factor of 2 per year. And that, that would, and made a forecast that would continue. And then in 1975 revised that it would not increase by a factor of 2 per year, but by a factor, but a doubling of integrated circuit density every 2 years. And it's really that law that we all kind of became familiar with, Moore's law. It's not a law in any sort of physical sense, but it's a law because the technology sector became so fixated with it, became so obsessed with it, that they willed it into existence. They willed the meeting of this exponential growth of density of computing circuitry on chips. And that density of computation is what allowed companies like Microsoft, the one I work for today, to scale themselves from small software companies to global players that increasingly are relied on to run our global economies. And I became very interested in that, very interested in whether or not or how to take the scale, the proven scale that the technology sector represents, and apply it to the problems of the environment, or the planetary problems, and to build solutions that scale. That's the aspiration. That was the aspiration, and it continues to be. And so when I finished my PhD, I had an incredible opportunity to join Microsoft and a blue sky research arm of the company called Microsoft Research. And I went there to help lead research programs at the intersection of environmental and computer science. And the reason that I went there, and I believe the reason that they wanted me to come there, is because we see that intersection of environmental and computer science, of the tech sector and the world's natural resources, as a massive opportunity. From a tech perspective, the planetary data represent the biggest data sets we can think of. The complexity of those data and the models that we run against those data represent some of the biggest computational challenges that we have. The markets that those natural resources feed into are some of the biggest markets in the world. And we know that if we can combine all of this together and help solve some of these problems, we will help solve one of, if not the biggest challenge in the world. And so as we started thinking about that, started working on this topic, working on this issue, we decided to think through that processes and programs and platform lens of scale that I'd mentioned earlier, and to put in place some aspects of that work through a new program called AI for Earth. And AI for Earth was an idea to use technology to fundamentally change the way that we monitor, model, and ultimately manage Earth's natural systems. And of course, that is an absurdly ambitious goal, but I believe that we need to be thinking at that level of an ambition if we're actually going to make any progress here. And so Microsoft, we launched AI for Earth 3 years ago almost now as a $50 million commitment to deploying machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies more generally in the 4 key areas of climate, water, agriculture, and biodiversity conservation. And at that time, we weren't quite sure what the demand for this sort of work at the intersection of environmental and computer science might be. But over the last 3 years, what we've realized is that the demand is almost infinite. We started this as really kind of a program that did 3 things. It provides access to cloud and AI technologies through grants of financial grants, technology grants, an education component where we work to close skills gaps between environmental and computer scientists and bring them together to build new solutions, and to sit down and actually code side by side and co-innovate, co-develop new technology solutions with grantees all around the world. And that was the idea when we started. As I said, we weren't quite sure if we were going to succeed, but over those past 3 years, we've built up a program that's now supporting about 613 projects all around the world. We're operating in more than 90 countries around the world. And that geographic diversity really matters, because I think environmental problems, of course, manifest themselves very differently in space and time. And so if you want to understand the problem space, getting back to that quote from Stuart Pym about not understanding at the organizational, temporal, and spatial scales. Well, if you're going to do that, then you need programs that run at those scales as well. And that's what we've been trying to build. And of course, not all of the projects that we support succeed. Not all of the projects that we support scale, but some of them do. And some of them have been scaling in incredible fashion. So I'm going to spend the next portion of this talk going through some of these projects and highlighting the ways that technology is helping us actually scale ecological insights. And so the first project that I want to talk about is one called Project Premonition, which is really about an ambition to change the way that we survey the biome, change the way that we lower the cost and increase the scale and the speed at which we're able to do those those biome surveys. And what it is predicated on is the notion that we can combine technology and biology in a way that scales. And one of the ways that you can combine technology and biology is through metagenomics, and to use the biological information that certain organisms, in particular blood-feeding organisms like mosquitoes and biting flies, the information that they extract from their food source and carry around with them. If we could somehow interact with that insect community in a way that would allow us to access the genomic information that they possess, we might be able to understand these systems at much greater scale. And so that's what the Project Premonition team has been doing. And there's really three components to this project that I think are incredible. The first is the laboratory component. Aspect where we're able to take entirely new robotic insect traps and put them in controlled natural environments that are highly sensed, and use that in controlled environment to understand the way that the biological community interacts with this technology intervention. And so here you can see mosquitoes flying around, high resolution computer vision tracking these mosquitoes as they explore one iteration type of our trap design. And we're able to study and model all of this information so that we can build a trap that maximizes for capture success. There's another aspect to this project, and that's in the field, because once we've built an idealized robotic field surveillance device, what we're able to do is take that out into the field and use different modalities of baits and lures, things like color, light, sound, chemical odorants, to be able to attract insects of all different types, and attract insects that we may want to collect for further downstream genetic analysis, or we can even just analyze the data that they represent immediately in the field. So for instance, when an insect flies through this device, we're able to, in sub-millisecond scale, use machine learning methods to classify and identify the species of that insect immediately without ever capturing it itself. And so this device can just sit there as a passive device, monitoring all of the insect community that it interacts with, or we can actually collect information. We can actually collect sample organisms and include them in a downstream gene sequencer and metagenomics platform in the cloud, because the cloud is really where the last aspect of this work goes, because after we are able to collect in particular organism as a sample, we can sequence its genome, we can immediately compare very quickly all its genome to all known organisms. And we can do that extremely quickly, right? We can do that within 3 hours by really innovating some current genetic algorithms. And we can then do some further downstream analysis to ask how well this system actually works. And when you compare it to synthetic metagenomes, when we kind of rig the system a little bit, we see that it gives back what we expect with 99.9% accuracy. We're also very accurate in placing novel viruses, for instance, because viruses are a fantastic application of this technology to be able to survey the viral load of any particular wildlife population. We do quite well there, and we're also able to place novel chordata, for instance, in their correct family. And so we know this works, and we're actively working to scale it up to test sites all around the world. Another application that I get super excited about from the perspective of scale is iNaturalist. And iNaturalist is really a pretty simple idea. It's saying, well, we don't need to just put robots out into the field. We can also put people out into the field. And we can put people out into the field with their smartphones, and we can connect those smartphones and their cameras to the data that they can collect about natural environments, and collect those people and their data into an overall global community of people jointly observing and identifying biodiversity all around the world. And iNaturalist is incredible, the growth that it's seen. It's not that old of an organization, yet it's managed to build up a global community of almost 3 million registered users who've contributed over 44 million observations of species all around the world, which represent almost over about 240,000 different species. And a lot of those species are relatively new or quote unquote rediscovered. So almost more than 11,000 of those species that were observed on iNaturalist haven't been observed or contributed to global platforms like GBIF in many decades. And so by putting the scale of humans and the smartphones in their pockets out into the world, and then connecting them back all together, we can achieve biodiversity observations at a scale that we've never seen possible. And it's not just about species, it's also about individuals of particular species. Another incredible organization is an organization called WildMe, and their technology, their wild books that they use to collect citizen science information, and then not just identify it down to a species perspective, but to identify it down to an individual perspective. And then using traditional mark recapture techniques can start to estimate overall global populations of different population numbers of different species. And so, you know, WildMe, they too have harnessed the power of the crowd. They've worked with over 8,000 citizen scientists and 200 researchers and volunteers. And what they've done is, for certain species like whale sharks, they've managed to identify up to 10 times more individuals of a certain species than we as a scientific community have done in our entire years of operation. And so it's a pretty incredible application. And I just want to show you here a quick video of how this all kind of works and how automated all of this is. And so this is really just an example of what happens behind the scenes with one of these wild books, where, for instance, it's out looking on social media platforms like YouTube every night to be able to identify whether or not any new video assets of, in this case, whale sharks were posted. You can see there's machine learning analysis going on, identifying things in the frame, translating the text from one language to another, and then going and actually pulling out images of that whale shark, doing pattern matching analysis, as we're going to see here in a second, to understand whether this species has been seen before, and if it is, to add that to the database, or if it isn't, to add a new one. And so you can see here it's comparing this whale shark to all known whale sharks. You can see it found a high probability pattern. The user here is saying, yes, that's a match, let's go back. And then, of course, it's not just, you know, the machine learning recognition. We can then use bots, for instance, to go and, in a supervised fashion, go out and automate an experience where where the application would respond to this human user and saying, hey, you actually are contributing to science, and here you can go and learn more about this whale shark. This whale shark here happened to have the cute name John Cena. So this is just one more example of how we can take technology, put it in the hands of people, automate it, and really lead to much better global wildlife population estimates. But it's not just about biodiversity that we can start scaling. You know, we also, when I talk about what is where, how much is there, and how fast is it changing, you know, we're also talking about just being able to understand at a large scale, where are our forests, where are our fields, our waterways, our built urban environments. And one of the organizations that's been doing incredible work in this space is the Chesapeake Conservancy. And the Chesapeake Conservancy was really interested in building a high resolution land cover map, a 1 meter resolution land cover map that would be 900 times more detailed than the land cover map that they had available in their mission to conserve the waters and lands of the Chesapeake Bay ecoregion across 64,000 square miles, an area that encompasses the livelihoods of 17 million people. And they wanted to build that land cover map, and to their credit, they did. They built a 1 meter resolution land cover map across all of this land and have been using it to accelerate their conservation work. But it took them well over a year and a half, them and their partners in the Chesapeake Bay Partnership Program, and cost well over $1 million, a time that meant that by the time we'd collected new satellite imagery, we were already behind, and a cost that was simply unaffordable to keep repeating for under-resourced nonprofits. And so what we did is started working with Chesapeake Conservancy to take the data that they'd collected, the high resolution satellite imagery that they'd been using, and to build a machine learning framework around that would scale, that would allow them to keep updating this system, and to then integrate it into the computational tools that they were the most familiar with using. In this case, Esri's ArcGIS system that I know many of you are familiar with as well. And so this is just a video here where you can see in the upper corner there, we have the high resolution imagery itself. And in the corner adjacent to it, we have the land cover map that the Chesapeake Bay program, Chesapeake Conservancy, put together. And then in the bottom two panels, we have the results, the live real-time results of our machine learning classifier. And so you can see the existing land cover and the AI classification matching quite well, and we can drag this this application around and immediately classify new land cover. And we can do that in places that it's never even seen before. So this is in a place in Michigan that happened to have its own land cover map that was built before this roundabout and retention pond were put in. And you can see that immediately our algorithm is able to update that outdated land cover map and to do it relatively quickly. The only issue is that you could see the lag in what I just showed you there. And when you want to do that at a national scale for almost a trillion pixels of analysis, the traditional way of doing that on, a few CPUs on your computer or a few GPUs on your computer just really wasn't scalable enough. And so what you're seeing here is kind of the speed at which a CPU processing could deploy the algorithm that we were running, that a GPU could do. And then the way that a different type of chip would be able to operate, a field programmable gate array, a way of actually directly programming the silicon so that we can optimize the circuitry for any particular deep neural network algorithm architecture. And you could see how much faster it went, and not just faster for one CPU, one GPU, or one FPGA, but then when you take this into the cloud, you can scale up to 500, 5,000, 500,000 CPUs, GPUs, FPGAs, and you can get some incredible scale and some incredible cost efficiencies here. So, for instance, we went and we took that algorithm that we developed in the Chesapeake Bay region of the United States, and we deployed it nationally for the United States. We looked at 200 million images, and we did that in about 10 minutes for a cost of $42. And there's still, algorithmic improvements, of course, that need to be made, but you can see the opportunity to take a process that worked, that took a year and a half and well over $1 million for one small part of the United States to 10 minutes for $42 for the entire United States. That's the type of scale that we're talking about working towards. It's the type of scale that we need. And of course, that was just talking about land cover itself. But you can also do things like what our partners Sylvia Terra are doing, which is, again, using high-resolution satellite and aerial imagery to not just ask where our forests are, but what species are in those forests and where particular trees are in that forest. And then to put that all together in one cloud framework to really be able to accelerate our overall understanding of the forests here in the United States, something that to this day we still don't fully have a great understanding of. Well, by partnering together, we were able to run Sylvia Terra's algorithm across the entire United States, across 537 million acres, analyzing almost over 800 terabytes of data at more than 10 times the speed that the Sylvia Terra had been able to do before, and come up with an accounting of almost 92 billion trees here in the United States, their locations, their latitude and longitudes, and in many cases their species, and to then be able to do lots of interesting things with that information. So for instance, partnering with us in the Nature Conservancy to bring small landowners in eastern Pennsylvania into avoided emissions carbon offset markets that a lot of companies purchase out of. So taking small landowners who are previously excluded from these emerging markets and bringing them together, all because of our ability to collect and then reanalyze data on a reasonable cycle. You're also able to then take information like that and build educational applications. This is just one application that was built off of back of Sylvia Terra's national US forestry inventory map, where we're able to help zoom in into certain locations and show the trees, the tree density, the tree height, the tree species composition, and allow users of an application to zoom around, experience it virtually, and learn about what's going on and ways that they can get involved to help protect these ecosystems. But more recently, we stepped back and we asked ourselves if we thought that the AI for Earth program was successful. And we came out of that exercise of introspection really with two takeaways. One, we were really proud, extremely proud of what we've grown with the program, and extremely proud of what some of the partners that we've worked with have been able to achieve. And we also came away with our eyes open, with a recognition that we actually hadn't achieved the type of scale that we were really looking for, the scale that would allow grantees from anywhere in the world to build on the work of each other, to take someone else's application and integrate it into theirs, to collaborate, to take code and integrate it into their application, and to share and provide best practices. And what we hadn't done is we hadn't worked hard enough to put together the scaling infrastructure that would make that all possible. The data curation platforms, the computational platforms, the ability to train and deploy, to train algorithms and to deploy them at scale as application programming interfaces. And ultimately, the ability to integrate those application programming interfaces or APIs into host applications for end user specific scenarios anywhere in the world. And so we also realized that there were a few key application areas that we needed to build infrastructure around to help scale, application areas that were necessary for any workflow from an environmental conservation perspective. This classification problem, this what is where, how much is there, and how fast is it changing? This forecasting application to ask what could be there or what will be there under a business as usual method. And then a planning application of saying, well, what should be there and how should we put that in space and time? And then an attribution application and an opportunity to be able to say, given that I've made this investment, given that I've made this intervention, how successful was it? Did the outcome have anything to do with me or not? This addressing this question of additionality. And so that's what we came away understanding. And what we came away with was a new commitment as well, a new commitment to build the infrastructure of what we're calling a planetary computer that serves as a platform, both for the data, the computing, the algorithmic training and API deployment and application scaling, as well as a specific focus on those 4 application areas of classification, forecasting, planning, and attribution. And that's what we're working on today, that kind of what we think of as that final, or actually second to final, scale requirement. And the reason that I say second to final is because that is the technology perspective on how we scale ecological insights, this infrastructure models, data, APIs, and applications, connecting together a community of contributors and a community of consumers all together into one mutually beneficial digital ecosystem. But there's one missing component in my mind, and that missing component is formalized, structured, governmental ecosystem assessments that scale. And there's a couple of things that I want to highlight here. The first is that there are ecosystem assessments. In fact, we had one hugely motivational for me in my early career, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. We have one underway right now, the IPBES Global Assessment, or the IPBS as a platform, and the global assessment and some of the regional assessments that they produce. But I just want to highlight something without trying to take away anything from what the IPBES Global Assessment has achieved, which is a monumental undertaking, an incredible compilation of science. But it was published 15 years after the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. It came in at 1,700 pages, cited 15,000 expert sources. And that's fantastic. We need assessments like this, and we need assessments at a global scale. But we also need assessments at national and regional scales, and we need technologies that can make those assessments sustainable. And by sustainable, I mean continuously operating, continuously queryable. And in many ways, what we need is what the PCAST, the President's Council on Science and Advisory Council on Science and Technology, recommended many years ago, which was that the US government should institute and fund a quadrennial ecosystem services trends assessment. And we're still waiting. You know, one of the things that I think was so important about this recommendation is this final bit of this quote here. It should be closely coordinated with the Quadrennial National Climate Assessment mandated by the Global Change Research Act of 1990. Here in the United States, we do have a national climate assessment mandated by the Global Research Act of 1990. In fact, I had the privilege of being on the Federal Advisory Council advising that national climate assessment. And I and many of my colleagues actually had a paper published in Science a few years ago recalling for this Quest assessment. And I think that this really, for me, is the final piece of the puzzle for what it will take for us to truly fundamentally transform the way that we monitor, model, and ultimately manage ecological systems. I know the science is being done. I know the technology is being done because I'm trying to help lead and invest in much of it. But we also need the policy and the policy framework to be done. And so as I close out this talk here, I just wanted to highlight an opportunity for the ESA community to be thinking about when we are thinking about ways to better the community, to better our science and improve our impact. And that's really additional training at the intersection of environmental and computer science, additional publishing at the intersection of those two sciences. That's why, for instance, I serve in a position of on the editorial board at Ecosphere, helping lead a new publication track on emerging technologies. We need much more funding in this space, much more funding asking how can we use technology to scale scientific research to achieve societal impact. And then, as I'd mentioned in the last two slides, we need policy that dictates this, that provides that landing place for all of our science and our technology accelerated scientific findings to land. And so with that, I just wanted to stop here to say thank you again for the opportunity to at least be with everyone virtually. I look forward to the next society meeting when we're able to be back together, and I look forward to the question and answer session that I'll be doing as part of this conference as well. So thanks again. Thank you for listening, and thank you for taking part in the first virtual Ecological Society of America annual meeting.